So Genesis 1, we're going to start where we start to see one of our keywords, and then we'll backtrack a little bit. So this is day 5, chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. Have you ever stopped to read Genesis 1, 20 through 23 and realize that there are sea dragons in your Bible in those set of verses right there? So just to put the Hebrew word in there, Elohim Yibara ha-gedolim Taninim. So it's plural. It's not just one, it's the Taninim. And every living creature that moves, with which that the water swarms according to their kind, every bird with wings according to its kind. So we're not just talking about generic sea creatures, because it specifies 2 words later, and every living creature that moves with which the water swarm. So there's a distinction between the Taninim and everything else that is in the water. They're putting this distinction between the two. One is living, has the caveat of also being living and swarming, and then there's the Taninim. But what is the day described as at the very end? It's still called good. So the Taninim are created as good. They're created as good products of God's creation. But they later become a description for the exact opposite. So there's something more happening here, of which they would have just kind of recognized right away, but we have to do extra homework for. So yeah, we have let the waters, so the Mayim, swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the face of the expanse of the heavens, or the Shamayim, so the waters above, as we've just talked about in our ancient Eastern cosmology. And God created the Taninim. They're not listed in the first set of let's create that. I'm gonna create this. I'm gonna create the sea creatures and this. Because 2 words later, it then describes the very things he said he was going to create initially. So we get a bonus creation here with the Taninim. This perplexed me for a long time. I was like, what the heck is this? Because they're not in the initial outline, but they're described as good, but it's a term used later to describe chaos. God is not the creator of chaos. So something else happens here. But let's unpack this further. There's another day there's a bonus creation. There is another day where there's a creation that is not listed initially with everything else. And I'll read it. This comes from day 4. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. So God made the 2 great lights, the great light to rule the day and the less light to rule the night. And also stars. Pretty much just like tosses that in. Oh, by the way, stars are created too. They're in there too. And God placed them in the expanse of the heaven to give light to the earth, which is primarily the sun that does that. But the stars kind of do that too. They're like mini suns. And to rule the day and the night, which one rules the day? The sun. Which one rules the night? The lesser light, aka the moon. And to separate light from darkness, which ties back to day 1. God saw that it was good, and there was evening, there was morning, a 4th day. So he creates lights. He says they're going to rule the days and the night, and he creates 2. He says the greater light to rule the day, lesser light to rule the night. Oh, by the way, here's some stars. Another little bonus creation. Do they shine light? Yes, they do. Of course they do. But they're not instructed as being in charge of the night or the day. They're just kind of thrown in there. There's something that the biblical authors later, especially the prophets, tie back to stars and spiritual beings. Caveat that because there's a lot of times they do the same exact thing with the Taninim. The Taninim and sometimes stars and other creatures are sometimes more of like this chaos force, this force of chaos, of which New Testament authors typically seem to be like, yeah, it's called demons, and it's called spiritual beings that have rebelled. Whereas Genesis 3 kind of depicts spiritual beings that rebel. All right. So the Taninim and the stars are both seen as something that's part of God's good creation. Specifically, we're going to say here, part of his Tov creation. Tov means good, merry, pleasant, desirable, in order, usable, beautiful. I want to specify that because this is a word that's also going to show up in Genesis 2 and 3, and is a word that people misassociate with the Hebrew word for perfect, which just means complete. This is not a synonym for the Hebrew word for complete and perfect. In fact, he describes it as tov, meaning that it is in order. It's in the structure that he wants it to be run. He wants it to run in a way where there are spiritual beings delegated with stuff to do, and human beings, which are the image of God, delegate with things to do, to rule over here. So yeah, tov, pleasurable, good, functioning the way he wants it to. The thing that's interesting is the domains of the Tanin and the Kokavim, Hebrew for stars. So the Tanin are based in the waters, and the Kokavim are based in the sky, which typically when do stars come out visibly? at night, so in darkness. Days 1 and 2.5, then God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness. Well, if there was light that had to be created of sorts, there was darkness, as we see much earlier. If we go back to chapter 1, verse 2, the earth was tovu vavohu, hoshek was over the face of the tahol. That's verse 2. Pre-day 1, we have perpetual darkness and stormy, this word for the abyss, deep chaos water. Preceding day 1, and it is the picture that is described of this formless and empty. Some people want to think that void mean that it was the void. That's not what void means here. Formless mean that tohu is the idea that it was unstructured, uninhabitable, not ordered, not pleasurable. Vavohu, void, meaning it was wasteland, empty. So it's not like it's the void, there's nothing there. But not like in a nothingness like we think about, like there is nothing living here. Why? Because it is perpetually dark and there's chaos water. It is just water and darkness. Day 1, let there be light. So you can do what? Separate light from darkness. God separated the light from the darkness and called the light day. Darkness he called night. There was morning one day. But there's a very interesting detail. God saw that the light was good. Tov. It's interesting. If you're calling the light Tov, that implies the darkness is not called Tov. That implies the darkness is bad. Not evil. One doesn't say it. There doesn't say it was. It's implying though, because the opposite of Tov isn't the Hebrew word for evil. It's Ra, meaning is bad. It's unpleasurable. All evil things are bad, but not all bad things are evil. So we get this picture here. Light good, darkness not called anything. Darkness is just left alone. The darkness is there. He puts light, which later prophets attribute to being God's glory and stuff. So God's doing this. And then day 4, the lights are given the very task that God is already doing in day 1. The light that's already there is already doing. They're given the task to rule the night and day. And this light is a thing that's called good. But the darkness is not called anything. It's just left alone. It's just called night, which would imply that it's Ra. If one's Tov and the other one's not called Tov, and it was a thing that's prohibiting from their being able to see anything at all, then it must be Ra. So you have Tov and Ra. Light, Tov, darkness, Ra. Which is interesting, since that is the domain of the stars. It's interesting. Day 2, God said, let there be an expanse, or the rakia, in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So the water is already there, pre-day 1, and is still there. Now let's separate it, put this hammered thing up there, separate them. So God made the expanse to separate the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. What's missing? It's not called good. The entire day goes by. It's not called Tov. Something I think a lot of people kind of skip over. Day 2 is not called Tov, which seems to imply that it implies by itself that there's more that's going to happen. It has not reached its final purpose yet, but God lets it alone for right now until day 3. Then God said, let the mayim, or the waters below the shamayim, aka the waters above, be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. So the water is prohibiting this dry land from appearing. So it's not like God say, hey, poof, dry land, now you show up, as I think some people have, at least in my history, kind of treated this as like, hey, God said, let there be land, and kapow, land appeared. No, it was the water must be gathered so the land can appear, so the land can be seen. The waters moved over. Interesting. Both days sound very familiar, at least to me, from Rig Veda 1 and Numa Elish, and a little bit of the Baal cycle. Waters being separated so dry land can appear. However, there's no conflict. There's no dragon, and God's not fighting anything. This is where we're getting a little bit of playing with the vocabulary, and yet not giving its full credit. Saying, hey, we're playing with this, but our God's different. We don't have to go to fight. He doesn't have to go to battle. He just kind of speaks, and things are. It's not until day 3 where God continues to work with the waters that we see Tov. God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place. Let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, or yam. And God saw that it was good. When is everything Tov? Between days 2.5, when the dry land appears. So everything's Tov when the land appears and when there's light. Which is interesting because we just dealt with, first off, the perpetual darkness, that's dealt away with, and we've dealt away with the cosmic waters that are preventing there from being life. But also, we have a complete fixing of the tohu problem. Things are now ordered. There is an order to everything. There's a dome protecting the water. There's light. There's day. There's day and night. There's this thing protecting the waters, separating the waters. There's land. Things are structured. There's a structure to it. Later on, plants appear. The rest of day 3. Tohu done. Day 5 and 6. All right, here's some stars. Here's some sun. Here's the moon. Here's some Taninim. Here's some sea creatures. Here's some birds. Here's some animals. Here's some humans. What do we have? Filling. The bohu is now done. Tohu, bohu, dealt with. Filling, ordering. It was unordered, couldn't be filled, now it's ordered. Tohu done. We're no longer tohu. Now we're reordering. Now we're filling. Bohu, dealt with, done. And the interesting is that we've talked a little bit about day 6 with humanity, with the image of God, but we have 2 special extra details of bonus creations, and their domains are in places that are implicitly Ra because the water has not been called Tov, at least in this narrative, and the darkness is not called Tov. In fact, it is their counterparts, or when their counterparts arrive, that things are Tov, but not them. So the water is sometimes depicted as a source of life, like water, we need it to hydrate, and sometimes it's depicted as something as opposing humanity, opposing creation, opposing life. This is an important thing to track. So we've already mentioned this a little bit before. Why would they be referred to as Ra? Not directly, but implicitly. If these things are what makes everything Tov, these things by themselves or what they are is not good. They're not pleasurable. They're not delightful. They're not what God wants. He does not want darkness and chaos water. He wants life. But these 2 things prohibit that, which again ties back to the Tohu Vavohu. But there's another key interesting detail. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, okay? We've went over this before, how I'm very much certain that this is a statement, not the actual creation moment, because the Shamayim is not made till day 2, and the earth doesn't appear till day 3. And also, I have a big problem if we're going to say that this is the creation moment, because in the next verse, now the earth was formless and empty, or Tohu Vavohu, or things were disordered and chaos. I have a big problem with the idea of God creating chaos. I have theological issues with that, because I can't find a passage to my memory that God does that. He may allow it, but he doesn't spawn it. So verse 1 can't be the creation point, especially when you have an actual day 1 later. And so why do we have a day 1 and a day 1? Doesn't make sense to me. But Caleb and I have gone over this in our little water podcast, which I would definitely recommend listening to some of that. It's going to look at like the water specifically and how it's sometimes described in different places, whereas we're looking at the things that are in the water. And so we're kind of seeing how they're tying together. But we mentioned this in there that if you look, darkness, so the Hoshek was over the face of the Tahom, which is this chaos water. Next sentence. And the Spirit of God, or the Ruach Elohim, hovering over the surface of the waters. We changed vocabulary here. So in Egypt, we have Atum, who is birthed out of the waters. In Enuma Elish, the waters are already there, and they go to fight over the waters and kill everything. In the Indra in Rig Veda splits the waters. So he fights the water in the sea. We don't get that. God is just there. He's not spawned from it. He's not fighting it. He's there. And before it's described as this dark, chaotic water. And now we have God's presence and it's just water. Which is why he's able to work through it and fill it with all these things and it not be raw for him to do that, or the things he put in it are not raw themselves. Like the Taninim are described as good. The stars are described as good. They're bonus creations and they're things used to describe other things much later, but they're all still part of his Tov creation. It's not perfect, never was complete. It never says that. It says it was very Tov. It was the Tovest as he wanted it to be at this moment. He created it as he wanted, as he structured it. He wanted to function this way. But it is not fully complete, is what he wants it to be. It's pleasurable to him. I prefer, like for this one, to say that instead of saying it was good, I understand why they did it, because grammar, it's an annoying thing that we have to deal with. I prefer for some of these to say it was desirable, it was the way he wanted it to be, is now or it was in order. It's in the order that he wants it to be. It's the way he desired it to function. He desired to function in this way where we share in this thing where he's ultimately the ruler and we don't really give him anything he doesn't have, but he wants to share in this thing. It's an outpouring of his love. And it's in this outpouring of love that he wants to share in this way, and he does so in this way. So it's tov. It's not described as perfect. It's described as me'od tov. So still not the word for perfect. Me'od tov. Very good. Me'od, which we mentioned in the sermon and in the Shema, meaning that it's an adjective. It's always used as very, which I find weird. Then we translate as much as might. I understand kind of why, but very good. It is the way he wants it to be. Which is why I kind of have slowly been accustomed to referring to Genesis 1 almost like this is the ideal. The ideal is that everything's in order, things are in their proper place, and things are functioning as they're supposed to be. This is how God wants it to be. We turn a page, or like 2 pages, and things aren't that way. It's not that God can't accomplish it, but it's his allowing of things in order to function the way he wants to. And if he's going to allow this relationship thing, there's things that he must allow. And that's what he does.